We are back in Hebrews chapter 9, finishing up that chapter if we can. And we have, in chapter 9, there has been a comparison between the earthly tabernacle, that earthly sanctuary, and also the heavenly. And it is a discussion between the copies, which is what that tabernacle and temples were, Solomon's temple, and then later the temple that was built in Ezra's day. And those are all the copies of the heavenly. If those copies were perfect, there would be no need for the heavenly. Those would be the solution. But since, as we will discover very soon, that the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. They can't do it. And that while these things had their effect, and their effect was that of a shadow looking forward to the real, and that is the cross of Christ. And also going to that the New Testament that would be enforced at the death of Christ, and we will be discussing that in just a bit, which is the perfect. That testament of the Son of God is perfect. It is far greater than the law of Moses ever could be. And so actually we have these words. So we're in chapter 9, verse 13. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled the unclean sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? There is this question of how much more. And in all through the book of Hebrews, we see of where, while this is true, how much more then is Christ? If this was to be followed, then how much more in following Christ? All of these things of Christ is greater. Christ is better. If the words of angels prove steadfast, well, how much more the Son of God? If the law of Moses was to be followed, and anyone transgressing that was to be punished accordingly, how much more the law of Christ? All of this in the book of Hebrews. Now we come to verse 15. And for this reason, he is the mediator of the new covenant. He is the creator of the new covenant. It is his will, and he is the mediator of it by means of death for the redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. Now, I want to read this again. I want to read it all in one fell swoop. Verse 15, so chapter 9, verse 15. And for this reason, he is the mediator of the new covenant by means of death for the redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant. So it doesn't just take care, and I said I was going to read that all in one fell swoop, I am, that those who are called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. His blood takes care of all sins that are in the future, going from the cross to the future. But also, what does it say in this? For the redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant. Because what was done then was not perfect and could not take away sins. And God, in due time, sent his Son to be the sacrifice for sins in due time. If due time happened to be while Adam and Eve were in the garden, then that would be due time. If due time would have been somewhere before the flood or somewhere shortly after the flood, then that would have been due time. But due time happened to be what we refer to as the first century. And prior to that, God is going to set up a nation, and this is all part of the due time. He is going to set up a nation apart from all other nations, and from that nation will come the Christ. That's going to take time. And so there are centuries that, actually thousands of years, are going to occur from Eden going all the way to the crucifixion of Christ. It's going to take time. And if there was another way, the law of Moses, if that was the way, there would be no need for the Christ. If the law of patriarchy, the sacrifices done to the law of patriarchy, were able to do it, there would be no need for the Christ. And understand that animal sacrifices were done by both. One by Levitical priesthood under the law of Moses, another in patriarchy, and it would be the patriarch of families. And if a man happened to be like an Abel on his own, then he makes his own sacrifices. It is required out of him. They were under a law, those Gentiles were under a law a long time ago, and then you have and Jews also, until we get to the law of Moses that separates them out. Now, we have a word concerning testaments. Because we have, in my book, I have what's called the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the New Testament comes into full force at the death of the one whose testament it belongs to, which is Christ, and that is called the Testator. Verse 16, for where there is a testament, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. What's a testator? Testator is the one who has the will and testament. What we commonly refer to as the last will and testament. Then at his or her death, it comes into full force. Prior to that, as it's about to say, it's of no force whatsoever. But at their death, this is their will. This is what they want done after their death, and then it comes into full force. As that happens to be with the Christ, it is the New Testament. And until he dies, it's not enforced. But after he dies, we have words such as in Matthew chapter 28, verse 18, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. All right, he didn't have that prior to his death. But after his death, he does have that. Now, we come to verse 17. For the testament is in force after men are dead, since it has no power at all while the testator lives. No power at all. And so we have the Old Testament, which of course we have given it that name. We've given it that name. The Old Testament starts off with patriarchy once there is sin in the world, then separation of Jew and Gentile with the law of Moses, then the end of both of those things with the death of Christ. He had to die, then his testament comes into full force for the entire world. Now, verse 18, therefore, not even the first covenant was dedicated without blood. But that first covenant, all right, that first covenant, it's not the blood of a human being. It's not the blood of Abraham. It's not the blood of Moses. It's the blood of animals. For Moses, now here we have details coming from Exodus 20, of the events that occur in Exodus 24:8, and we're going to have a quote from there. But what is mentioned here is not mentioned in Exodus 24. But that doesn't matter. We get this information. For when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water, scarlet wool, and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, here's our quote, this is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you. That's Exodus 24:8, direct quote from there. Then likewise he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. And according to the law, almost all things are purified with blood. Here is a major fact. And without shedding of blood, there is no remission. That's a major fact. That concerns what does it take to remove sin. It's going to take blood, but it's not the blood of bulls and goats. It's going to take the blood of the Son of God willing to do that. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins, and nothing can do it, nothing except the blood of Christ. So what was the point of all the bulls and the goats and the rams and the lambs and the doves and all of those sacrifices? And the oxen, what was all that about? That was the earthly, the copies, the shadow of the things to come. Those were acts of obedience necessary. Necessary. Why were they necessary? Because God commanded it. That's enough to know. God commanded it. They are necessary acts of obedience in service to Him, in worship to Him. And these things did concern sins, but they could not take away sin. They couldn't. You have this, as will be described, a reminder of sin every year when the high priest goes into the holiest of all there with the Ark of the Covenant. And there's a sacrifice of sin first for him and then for all the nation of Israel. That was once a year. Now with Christ, it's going to be one-time event. And it's everybody. One-time event. Okay, we read these words again. Without shedding of blood, there is no remission. Okay, here is a fact that it just is. It is a fact, and it's just the way things are. And so there has to be some kind of shedding of blood. There has to be. Verse 23. Therefore, it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavenlies should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. The copies had to be purified with something, and so something innocent did die for something, for someone who was sinful. The oxen committed no sin. The goats, the lambs, all those are the innocent, and they are dying for, this is in the copies, they're dying for, as sacrifices for the sinful, for people. And with Christ, you have a better sacrifice. This isn't a copy, this is the heavenly. It's the real. So we read verse 23 again. Therefore it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens. So what are these copies of the things? These are everything mentioned in concerning Exodus 24. Those copies of the tabernacle is a copy of the heavenly. Those sacrifices, a copy of the heavenly. The priesthood and the high priest himself, a copy of the heavenly. These should be purified with these, that is, the blood of these animals, and specific animals, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has not entered the holy place made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. So in this, we now serve the true, not the copies. We serve the heavenly, not the earthly. We serve that which is better, that which is perfect, not the things that are shadows of the perfect to come, but perfection itself. And that is Christ himself. And a better priesthood, the better sacrifice, better sacrifices that are mentioned. For Christ is not, verse 24, for Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are the copies of the true, but into the heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Verse 25, not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood of another. He then would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So, unlike the earthly priesthood, they offered the blood of another, of something else. They had to do it regularly, and to read all the sacrifices that were required, it was constant work for the priest. There was steady work there. That was for the priest. It wasn't just the high priest going once a year into the holiest of all. It was constant sacrifices being made. It was always being done. But now with one sacrifice, there is no need for anything else. And he had to die, but only once. He doesn't have to offer this blood repeatedly. Otherwise, as verse 26 said, he would have to suffer often since the foundation of the world. Since Genesis chapter 3, he would have to offer himself always, perpetually through that, suffering always. But once at the end of the ages, not at the foundation of the world, but now at the end of the ages. What does that mean? Yes, we are at the end of the ages. We didn't choose when we would be born, but we are now at the end of the ages. And the end of the ages began with the crucifixion of Christ. That's when it began. And that is the center point of humanity's history on the earth. That is the central point of it. And before anyone begins to jump to any conclusions, I'm not saying that there is some kind of symmetry between like where creation is, the cross of Christ, and the same amount of time between the cross of Christ and creation, you have the end of time. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't know when the end of time is. I have no idea. We're 2,000 years past the death of Christ. We're 2,000 years now. How many more years are there till the end? We don't know. Never have known. But we are in that last segment of human history. In that last segment, which Peter says began then. He said in Acts chapter 2 that we were in the last days. Or I should say, he and those living then in Acts chapter 2, they're in the first century. It'd been AD 30. They were in the last days. He states it. And so here we have this sacrifice at the end of ages, not at the foundation of the world. He's appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Now, we have these next two verses speaking of we just die once, and so was Christ. So did Christ. And as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment, so Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. Okay? So one may ask, well, verse 27 kind of seems like a random thought to put in here. Well, it actually fits. It fits concerning the fact that he only had to die once. All right? But the effect of his death was to bear the sins of many. And to those who eagerly wait for him, he will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. He returns a second time not to take care of sin. He's already taken care of sin. He's coming back for judgment. which is precisely what verse 27 said. Verse 27 saying, man dies once, Christ died once for all. Then the judgment, Christ returns apart from sin. He's not coming back to save mankind again, going on the cross again. He's already done that. He's coming back for judgment, is what he's doing. Now we go to chapter 10. For the law having a shadow of the good things to come. Now, what is the law? That's the law of Moses. Having the shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with these same sacrifices which they offer continually year by year make those who approach perfect. All right? We have made mention of that. Year after year, all these sacrifices were being made. It's the shadow of the good things to come. That is the Levitical priesthood in the temple or in the tabernacle, depending on the year. But year by year they did this. They could not make those who approach perfect. For then would they not have ceased to be offered. So here is this again, that if the blood of these animals could do this, then that sacrifice would just continue all the way through time. They wouldn't have to stop. There would be no need to send Christ here on the earth ever, except for judgment. There would be no need for him to be here and to die on the cross. No need whatsoever. If these were sufficient, if these could do the job, then they would just continue. But they've been ceased. For then, verse 2 again, for then would they not have ceased to be offered? For worshipers once purified would have had no more consciousness of sin. All that would have been enough. Sins would be taken away. But in those sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year, for it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sins. A shadow, a reminder, also a way of contrast and comparison. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of animals died in animal sacrifices. No way of numbering that. But one Son of God. These can't do it, but He can. These were continual as a foreshadowing of the perfect. Here are the copies. He is the perfect. Going back to that comparison with the Passover lamb from Exodus, the commands there in Exodus, He is that Lamb of God that is sacrificed at the end of the ages. He is the one that takes away sins. These others cannot. Now, we have these things of the shadow that continued until the real came. Now we'll go to verse 5. Therefore, when He came into the world, He said. Now this is quoting Psalm 40, verses 6 through 8. Now I want to say this again. I want to read the beginning of verse 5 again. Therefore, when he came into the world, He said. Who is He? It is Christ, not David, not the psalmist. The psalmist is recording what he has been inspired to record. He's putting this down. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. All right, this is a quote from Psalm. If we were to go to Psalm 40, I do want to look at this briefly, because this is one of those places where the difference the difference between what we have, and it's a direct quote from the Septuagint, and what we have here in Hebrews is a direct quote from the Septuagint. And being that it is quoted here means that it is very legitimate. Not just a little bit, it is a very legitimate quotation. Now, Psalm 40, let's just begin in verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of the horrible pit, out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet on a rock, upon a rock, and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth, praise to our God. Many will see it in fear and will trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust and does not respect the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Many, O Lord my God, are your wonderful works which you have done, and your thoughts toward us cannot be recounted to you in order. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. My ears you have opened. Burnt offerings and sin offering you did not require. Then I said, behold, I come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God, and your law is within my heart. Now, we go back to Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, where we have these words, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. All right, now, from what I read, it didn't say, but a body you have prepared for me. But the Septuagint does have that, and it is quoting from the Septuagint. Does that mean what we have in our Old Testament is flawed? And the answer is no, it's not. Quite often, the Bible in another section will be referencing or quoting something, and it will alter the quote ever so slightly to where more of the full meaning is now made known. More of the meaning is known. And the Bible does that. And here, let's just begin in this. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. Well, I can read Exodus, beginning in Exodus. I can read in Genesis chapter 4, where there's sacrifice and offering, and Abel's sacrifice is accepted by God. Cain's sacrifice is not accepted by God. All right, and we go to Noah. Noah is continuing in those sacrifices. Abraham, on the other side of that flood, continues in those sacrifices. Then we get to Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, and we see sacrifices being done, and then a continuation of those things through the history of the Jewish people and of the Gentile people. They're supposed to be as well. So if he didn't desire this, why is it even there? Because we come to verse 6. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you had no pleasure. There's no pleasure in it. What's the deal here? First off, it's dealing with something that shouldn't be here to begin with. Sin. Now, to make a minor analogy in this, I have no pleasure at all that every now and then a exterminator comes to our house and sprays the inside and the outside of the house. I have no pleasure in that. But I'm the one that has it done. Why? Because there are bugs, and we have to treat the bugs. We got to get rid of the bugs. I have no pleasure. If life could be where I didn't have to have an exterminator, that would be great. But the fact of the matter is, there are bugs, and bugs are attracted to things, a place to live especially when it gets cold, a place to live, a place where they can, in fact, find food in ways that I can't even imagine, of like a cardboard box or a piece of styrofoam or something like that. Don't even think of those as being food. But I have to have somebody coming in and poisoning the bugs. All right? With God, He has to deal with sin. That's the first part of this. He has to have a way of dealing with sin. But it's not the fact that there are bulls and goats that have to die in this. It's that for the very sacrifice that must take place, and that is His Son. His Son must do that. There will be no pleasure in that at all. None. Love, yes. Pleasure, no. No, that is suffering on the Son's part, harsh, bitter, horrid. And then the Father witnessing, and the Holy Spirit witnessing that and being part of that. And there is no pleasure in that. There's no pleasure at all in that. So, sacrifice and offering you did not desire. No. A world without sin. That's what He desired. But a body you have prepared for me. Look at that. A body you have prepared for me. That's showing this has nothing to do with bulls and goats. It has to do with the Son of God and His sacrifice. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you had no pleasure. Then I said, Behold, I have come. In the volume of the book it is written of me to do your will, O God. I have come. In the volume of the book it is written of me. Here, the Messiah, this is a quote. Then I said, this is a quote from the Christ Himself. This could be the incarnate Christ, that is, or Him as in the flesh. This could be Him before He comes to this earth. But He says, in the volume I have come, in the volume of the book it is written of me to do your will, O God. Prophets prophesied concerning the Christ. Prophets prophesied concerning His death. Isaiah prophesied it. David prophesied it. Others prophesied it. Christ prophesied it. Of course, that would not be in the volume of the book it is written of me, because He's speaking of the volumes or the scrolls that had already been written, which would be the writings of Moses, the writings of David, the writings of Isaiah, the writings of others. They would have written these things concerning Him, and He came to fulfill it. And when He said, I've come to fulfill the law, not to destroy the law, but to fulfill, He does mean He is fulfilling prophecies found in the Old Testament. He is also bringing that law to its end. Not all law, because we do have the law of Christ. He is bringing the law of Moses to an end, which is a shadow, a copy of the heavenly, of the perfect. Now, we go to verse 8, and he continues bringing out things in this psalm. Previously saying, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings, and the offerings for sin you did not desire, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, Behold, I have come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first that He may establish the second. He takes away that first covenant, and He's going to establish the second covenant. He's got to do that. By that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And every priest stands ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. From that time, waiting till his enemies are made his footstool. All right, and that also is a reference of Psalm 110, of which there's we've had a lot of things from, well, specifically Psalm 110:4 in the book of Hebrews. But this is Psalm 110 verse 1 that he's referencing here. And he's waiting till his enemies are made his footstool, and they will be. That includes death, which is the last enemy, which is an extraordinarily powerful enemy. For by one offering, verse 14, for by one offering he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified. So all this was done once in a specific time at the end of the ages, and it is a sacrifice for sin forever. And in that, he sits at the right hand of God until it is time for all this to end. He is waiting, just like we are waiting. He is waiting for this to, just as those who are in Hades are waiting. All are waiting for this to happen. Let's just put it all in more into perspective. God is waiting. That would be the entire Godhead. They are waiting, and it is on God's timeline, exactly when the last enemy is made his footstool. That's on his timeline, when that will happen. Angels wait as well. Angels have while God would know that when that's going to happen, especially the Father, and I can only assume that the Son knows now, but when he was on this earth, he said he did not know. The angels cannot know, not until it's revealed to them. Satan and demons, unclean spirits, and all of that, they cannot know. They're going to know the same time we know. And then you have those who have passed on before us, all those hundreds of generations, they have passed on before us. They wait for this to occur. And then the living, here we are, the living also wait for this to occur. That's a lot of people, and to use that word, that's a lot of individuals that are waiting, and it's going to happen. And Satan knows that he has very little time, and he doesn't know how much time he has, but he knows that after the death of Christ, that the next thing that's going to happen is Christ's return. And that's as unpredictable to him as it is to us. Now, verse 15. But the Holy Spirit also witnesses to us, for after he has said before, this is the covenant that I will make with them after these days, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. So this is going back to Jeremiah 31 in verse 33, which he's already quoted this. Then he adds, their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. Okay, and in chapter 8 he quoted this. Now he's returning back to this, which is a pattern, just as a little side note, which is a pattern in the book of Hebrews. He does this a lot. Whoever the writer is does this a lot. Verse 18. Now where there is remission of these, there is no longer an offering for sin. It's once for all. Therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he consecrated for us through the veil, that is his flesh, and having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. All right? There is the lawless deeds are remembered no more. His law, as we said, He didn't bring it into law because I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. They will be there. And we have the New Testament that is going to show us these things. They're going to show us. And also, we need to understand concerning the conscience of each one of us is created with a conscience. Our conscience has the basics of right and wrong. One can kill their conscience. You cannot know everything that is right. You can't. Nor can you know everything that is wrong, but with some very large categories, we are born with it. We're born with it. It can be taught out of us. It can be killed. But we have a conscience. And when Jesus spoke of the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak, that conscience is part of that spirit being willing. But the flesh is weak. And that's a universal statement to all mankind. Now, let's go ahead and close it down. This is a good place to stop for today. And appreciate everybody being with us. And hopefully we will continue next week.